What's up, guys? Just want to make another quick computer video here. Last one I did was on AMD versus Nvidia, and of course I flubbed up every single time I was talking about it because I kept saying Intel part of the time, and I always corrected myself, but I still kept saying it. But this one should be a little easier. Hopefully I won't mess anything up here. AMD versus Intel. Now, people ask all the time, what's better, AMD versus Intel? Now, just like my graphics card video, I'm just going to pretty much give my experiences, my opinions. There's no real true way, I guess, to say which one's better. I mean, the typical answer is AMD is better for your budget, but Intel performs better. Like, overall, higher end, Intel just performs better. It has better calculations, all kinds of stuff that it just does. And when we say better, we mean faster. You know, it doesn't mean necessarily just because you have 8 cores from AMD, that's just, okay, well, it just has more cores, so it's going to smoke Intel. That's not how it works. And it's very, very technical. It's really it's really hard to explain. I mean, you got to go through tons of stuff. You got to go through, you know, how much cache does it have? You know, how many megs of cache does it have? All kinds of stuff that you go through. It's not just simply, okay, this is a 3 gigahertz dual core Intel, and here's a 3 gigahertz quad core AMD. It's just not like that anymore. It's, you know, typically back in the day you could say that, but nowadays it's too complex. The math and everything, calculations, it's just too complex. You just can't really base it on that. So here's the short version. AMD, better for your budget, you know, but I would say performs a little bit weaker. But again, for your budget, it works perfectly fine. Typically, people buy AMD for games. If they're just trying to build a PC that can play video games, typically you're going to want to put that money into the graphics card anyway. You just want a CPU that can just help you stand alone for that stuff. So if you just get like some quad core from AMD and sink in a nice graphics card, you'll be good to go for the most part. Intel is typically usually stuff like video editing, anything that's real CPU intensive, you probably want to go Intel. I can tell you that from experience because I notice when I make videos here on my computer for YouTube, I notice that this, even though it is a little bit faster, for being a quad core versus my Pentium not my Pentium D, but my Pentium Sandy Bridge chip in my laptop, I mean, this does perform a little bit better than that, but in comparison, they perform close to the same. And that's kind of sad, seeing as how this is an AMD FX 4100 overclocked to 4 gigahertz, and it's doing just a little bit better than, you know, a Pentium Sandy Bridge in a laptop that's only like, you know, 2.2 gigahertz dual core, and this is overclocked to 4 gigahertz and it's quad core. I mean, you know, it's just things like that that you tend to notice. So again, personally, I think AMD's a little bit better just in the fact that it has a better budget. And for what most people do, most people are going to want to go AMD. Unless you're doing some intense stuff like streaming, or you're doing tons and tons and tons of video editing, and you're doing it, you know, you're messing with 1080p and 4K files, and, you know, you're rendering couple hour-long videos, then yeah, I would definitely recommend going Intel for that. So that's pretty much the rough rundown. So now I'll just go ahead and give my past experience with AMD and Intel. For the most part, I've always ran Intel systems. I know from the way I was talking, it sounded like I ran AMD systems, but I don't. Most of the time I've ran Intel. I've hardly ever ran AMD. And in fact, this and one other machine I have are the only 2 AMD systems I've ever had. I started off on an old Celeron processor. I'm not even sure what socket it was, because it was around the Pentium 3 days. So it was somewhere around that. So it was lower scale than a Pentium 3. It was a 633 megahertz Celeron. So take that for what you will. The next CPU I went up to was a Pentium 3 1 gigahertz, and I ran that for a few years. Then I went up to the, I believe it was Centrino M, I want to say. Celeron M or Centrino M or something. It was a laptop processor. 1.7 gigahertz. Then after that, I had a Core 2 Duo, a T6400. That was a 2 gigahertz dual-core chip. That was in my Gateway laptop that I used to use for making videos when I started out here on this channel on YouTube. Then after that, I went to... I had another little test rig where I mentioned before where I first got an FX 5200 graphics card. That was where I had an old AMD Athlon XP system, my first AMD system, and that was a 1500 plus. So it was a 1.5 gigahertz single core chip. So I had those for a while. Then around 2 years later, I found a used computer that was being sold by a buddy of mine. His mom was getting rid of it, getting a new computer, and she was selling her Celeron D system. And so I had that, and that was a 3 gigahertz single-core Celeron D system. And I upgraded that to a Pentium D950, and that was a 3.4 gigahertz dual-core chip. And I put an aftermarket Dynatron cooler on it, and it worked great. It was a little bit slow. Well, I would say it wasn't, no, excuse me. I wouldn't say it was slow. I'd say those things typically ran hot. That's from what a lot of people reported, but with an aftermarket cooler, I think they ran fine. I didn't notice it really running hot at all. So that was what I had for Intel. And then, of course, later on the next year, my laptop failed in 2012, and then I replaced it with what I currently had up until I got this machine, this desktop, which was an Intel Pentium. It was I just always call it a Pentium Sandy Bridge. It was just a basic Pentium processor. It wasn't an i3 or anything like that. So that's what I had. So out of all those, that was like 4 or 5 Intel systems, and I only had one AMD system. Now currently I own an AMD rig, but I built this one myself. And you know, it was very cheaply built. It only cost me about $400 to build this system. Now at the time I wanted to build an Intel system, but quite frankly I just couldn't afford it. The prices for motherboards, especially, not only that, the CPUs are always more expensive, but the motherboards also coincide with that. You know, a typical motherboard from AMD, not only is the AMD CPU cheaper, but the motherboard's usually cheaper too. Typical motherboard you get from AMD is about $30 more on Intel's platform. So again, you have that problem to look forward to as well with Intel. Again, that is if price is your problem. If you have a budget, then yeah, that's why I always say go to AMD. But if you don't have a budget and you're going to be doing some pretty intense stuff, go to Intel, because Intel's going to have that performance you need. Granted, Intel costs more, but you get more by spending more. But with AMD, you get more bang for your buck. And right here, where I've got an AMD FX 4100 quad-core CPU, overclocked to 4 gigahertz. This is a $100 chip. Okay, and it works great. It works for what I need it to do. It is a little slow in the video rendering, but that's it. Other than that, it's perfectly fine. It plays every single game I run perfectly fine, 60 frames a second, not really much load times at all. And I think that also concurs with the hard drive more than anything. If I had a faster hard drive, I think that would help quite a bit. But, you know, CPU also helps in that as well. I think it's more so the hard drive, though, but that's just me. But at the end of the day, there we go. I mean, there's all the systems I had for AMD and Intel. Majoritively, I've had Intel. If I had all the money in the world and had no budget, sure, I'd go Intel. But as far as this goes, no. If I have a budget and I can build a machine like this pretty much from the ground up for about $400, and that's it, and I've got an AMD system ready to go, and you've got an Intel system that takes about $500 to $600 sometimes, mainly about another $100 more, about $500, to build basically the same system. Again, you have those benefits from Intel, like with the faster calculations with rendering and things like that. But other than that, it really, to me, AMD just has the better price to performance. Again, Intel does have the better performance. As of right now, Intel is better. But again, for the price, I don't really see it. You know, I've seen people say that they bought AMD FX 8-core chips and they're running them just like an i7, and, you know, granted it may not be like the highest end i7. So when you say i7, that's a very broad term. But again, people are saying that they're getting just as good of, and some people build both. And they're like, I can't tell a difference. You know, some people probably can't. And that's just what I'm saying at the end of the day. There are some of these fanboys out there that get so heated into this stuff, saying how much better it is, and really at the end of the day, unless you're doing some kind of video rendering, you're probably not even going to notice it. You really aren't. Unless you're doing something really, really CPU intensive, you're probably not going to notice it. With AMD in games and all that other stuff, you ain't going to notice it. Now with rendering, again, yes, you will notice it. Like I said, I know from experience. I know that my laptop, it doesn't render as fast as this AMD chip, but it renders pretty close. This renders pretty slow for what it's considered to be. So, that's just what I wanted to give my opinion on for AMD and Intel. I'm not an AMD fanboy. I've had more Intel systems than AMD, but as far as the price to performance ratio goes, again, you can't beat AMD. But as far as if you don't have a price, you know, you don't have a budget or anything like that, then I'd recommend going Intel. Because you're going to get faster rendering, you probably get just faster stuff in general. But most of the time with games and stuff, you're not really going to notice that much. Yeah, you may get a little, oh, I got 5 more frames, or maybe 10 more frames with the most top-of-the-line CPU. You're not going to get that much more. Because a lot of games are based on GPUs. They're not based on CPU that much. Not by much. It's not going to give you this dramatic increase. Well, I've got a Core i7 and you've got a FX 4100 and I'm going to get 70 more frames because I have this super duper CPU. It doesn't work like that. And it's just mind-blowing how so many people think that that's how it works. You know, you're just going to get this big increase, and you're just not. It just doesn't work like that. So again, just wanted to give my opinion on that. And yeah, that's all I got to say. So thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Take care, and we'll see you next time. Peace.